Welcome to Greyhawk 76. I'm your host, Ken Newquist. Today we're going to talk books. Greyhawk 76 campaign is kicked off. I need Sourcebooks to provide information about the World of Greyhawk and just to supplement the campaign. So first off, we have the Player's Handbook 2024 edition, all the new and updated rules, kind of foundational to running a test drive campaign. So that's book number one. More on that as we get into it. Dungeon Master's Guide 2024 edition. The cool thing about this and what inspired our Greyhawk 76 campaign in the first place was that it has Greyhawk as an example campaign included in the book. Right in the middle of the book, it's got an introduction to Greyhawk. It has the City Of. It has information about the environs, like the areas in and around, like the plains of Greyhawk, the Cairn Hills, that kind of thing. And then it also has a high-level overview of the campaign setting itself. So it's just enough to get you started. It also includes quite the spiffy map, which has been sort of updated and revised. I don't necessarily agree with all of the changes, but it is a nice, big, pretty map of the Flaness, which is the central region where all of the action happens in Greyhawk. It's part of the continent of Auric on the planet of Orith. So anyway, there's your big map of the Flaness, and Greyhawk's like right in the middle. I can't actually point to it without dropping the map. And then the other side, we get a nice, big, beautiful map of the free city of Greyhawk itself. I have a couple versions of this map at this point, but I actually have a couple versions of both at the same time because my friends and I have been campaigning in Greyhawk for close to 30 years. So I got a lot of stuff, but it's always good to have another map. And, I might throw it up on one of these walls as a reference, right? So now I will say, as a Greyhawk fan, they made some changes that I don't actually understand in terms of continuity. So it's loosely based on the 1980 Greyhawk folio. And because they did that, they made some straight up mistakes. Like they used the wrong Greyhawk calendar. So Greyhawk has a calendar. The original one was like 360 days, and then it had like 12 months of 28 days each. And then the festival weeks were, I think there's festival weeks between each season, which are about 6 days. It messed up the math. So when they released the 1983 box set, they fixed it. And they didn't use the fixed version of the calendar, which we've been using the fixed version of the calendar for my entire campaign. I honestly didn't even know that there was an older broken version of the calendar. The other thing is they just made some funky changes, right? And I think part of this was trying to update Greyhawk for modern sensibilities and trying to fit all of the things into Greyhawk. I've seen it mentioned online, and I'm going to include some of the commentary in the show notes. Like, I don't know, Greyhawk would have actually been a great example of where you don't have to fit everything for Dungeons & Dragons into your campaign. You could expressly call out that maybe Dragonborn, which never really existed in Greyhawk, that I remember. That's probably an argument somewhere over on the forums, but they're not standard characters for the World of Greyhawk as is, but they just kind of show up in this. It might have been cool to say Dragonborn don't exist in the World of Greyhawk, but here's how you could include them. Goliath, they don't normally exist in the World of Greyhawk, but here's how you can include them. And oh, by the way, there's a bias against the Giants because they invaded the Grand Duchy of, or will invade. I'm trying to remember my timeline here. There's the Giant Troubles, the classic Against the Giants modules, right? Like that all happened in the World of Greyhawk. And so there's some history with giants that people might need to think about. They also make other changes, like the Baklunish shot first in the great apocalyptic war between them and the Sul Empire. The Sul shot first. This gave rise to the Twin Cataclysms, which are a major event in the World of Greyhawk that happened, it's like 1,000, 2,000 years in the past, but it was devastating. It kind of matters who shot first. It kind of sets the tone for the rest of the campaign. I don't know. I'm actually thinking about maybe running with it and having this new campaign be an alternative reality where, well, what happened if the Baklunish shot first, right? Like, how would that affect the timeline? How would that affect cultures? I don't know. I'm kind of like curious about it now because over the years, Greyhawkers have had lots of debates about alternative timelines and what is not canon, which is why one of the most popular websites for Greyhawk is Canon Fire, because Greyhawkers love to argue about canon. They also made changes like Otto, who's a long-standing member of the Circle of Eight, is now a dwarf. Okay, so he was a little rotund before. I think that was his standard illustration, but a dwarf? I mean, I don't know. This is like saying Elminster's a dwarf, right? Like, would you just change major NPCs in the Forgotten Realms? I don't know. Just struck me as odd. But in any case, the other thing they call out are the big bads for the campaign, which I think, is fair. They talk about elemental evil as one of the primary conflicts to drive a Greyhawk campaign. In this timeline, the Temple of Elemental Evil rose, was defeated by a bunch of heroes only a couple of years earlier. I think it was like 572 or something like that. So there could be remnants of the Temple of Elemental Evil still running around. They also cite dragons because, dragons. Although dragons are never really a major driver of conflict in the world of Greyhawk. And I guess people just like dragons. But that's another example of like, well, you don't need to shoehorn them into Greyhawk. There's other ways to bring dragons into it. They agree, and I think everybody agrees, that one of the major evils is Ayuz. He is the leader of these ragtag bands of humanoids and bandits and what have you in the north, orcs, goblins, whatever. He was famously captured by the Archmage Zygig and entrapped in Castle Greyhawk. And not too long ago in the campaign timeline, he has escaped to the north. He will be causing lots of trouble in the future. I do think, though, and I agree with some of the commentators online, that one of the major stories that they kind of avoided was the conflict with the Grey Kingdom. They talk about it. The Grey Kingdom is this massive empire. Think of like the Roman Empire, and it's fallen to decadence, and it causes all of these conflicts because it's busily trying to destroy itself, and some of that spews out into the larger world, and people have to form alliances to deal with the Grey Kingdom. There's also the Scarlet Brotherhood, which is I think they updated it to the Scarlet Order now or something like that in the new release. They're behind the scenes trying to manipulate the whole of the world. So they are another major sort of conflict and story within the world of Greyhawk. So anyway, I will link to the commentary in the show notes. It's a fascinating read. People have far more knowledge of Greyhawk than I do at this point. Maybe 20 years ago I would have known all this stuff, but I don't now. So talking about Greyhawk as it exists in 576, I will be consulting the tattered remains of my 1983 Greyhawk box set. I was very hard on my D&D box sets when I was a kid. I beat the crap out of this. You can see I also colored it because, why not? The Guide to Greyhawk is kind of like the successor to the Folio edition, and it has write-ups on each of the different countries that exist within the world of Greyhawk. It also gets into geography and wastelands and stuff like that. It lists out the gods, including demigods, lesser gods, greater gods. I think it might have the quasi-gods, I'm not positive. But in any case, it's a good foundational source for the world of Greyhawk. My favorite book, which I have used so much, is the Glossography, that's what has, it just has all kinds of great stuff, like rates of travel, encounter tables, and they're broken down by regions and terrain type, right? So it's really fantastic. It also has a whole weather system, and it has information about temperatures, right? So if you're in the northern portions of the world of Greyhawk, it's obviously going to be colder, right? My characters are adventuring in the temperate band, which is going to make things a little bit easier for them. There's also a Greyhawk weather generator out there that I'll include in the show notes. I've been using that quite a lot for all of my campaigns. That's pretty cool. It kind of automates this whole weather generation piece. See, here's my example of weather generation. Old school, it's fun to sit down and roll this up with dice. It's also very time consuming. So if you're interested in weather in your campaign, I definitely recommend grabbing this. The PDFs for the 83 box set are up on DM's Guild because Greyhawk material is now supported there. Next up, I have Greyhawk Adventures. It's a hardcover. I think it was released in, checking my notes, 1988. It has some more information about deities in the world of Greyhawk. It's got a bunch of monsters like cactus vampires, camp rats, the famous Greyhawk dragon. That's another annoying thing about the DMG, talking about Greyhawk. They insert I think it's like a copper dragon as a defender of the city, which is a little too Baldur's Gate for me, especially when we have the very cosmopolitan and social and already defined Greyhawk dragons. Like that would have been a great example of, hey, how do you make your campaigns stand apart from all these other campaign settings or a boxed campaign setting? Create your own monsters that are unique to the setting, like Greyhawk dragons, right? So why not use those? And then the very famous sword wraiths, which I think this might have been their first appearance in Greyhawk. There's also some spells, magic items. They get into some very specific locations in the world of Greyhawk, like the Sea of Dust, the Sinking Isle, the Twisted Forest, the Burning Cliffs, and a bunch of other stuff I can't necessarily pronounce. The Geysers of Death, and the Stone Circles, which I famously used in one of my earlier Greyhawk campaigns to trick and imprison the entire party. It was great. Doppelganger was involved. So, hey guys, watch out for those doppelgangers. So this is a really good book. It's a hodgepodge, right? It's a bunch of background information for Greyhawk. It's not essential, but again, if you're looking for adventure ideas or places to go to, this is a good book to pick up. Another book I'll be using quite heavily is The City of Greyhawk, which is part of TSR's Greyhawk Adventures line for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition. It comes with 2 books, one of which is Greyhawk, Gem of the Fleness, which does a bunch of write-ups on various parts of the city, and it's cool because it's got some let's see, adventure, right? Suggestions, a few random encounters, if I remember correctly. And it gets into some specific stuff. It's not as detailed as I might like, but it certainly has more information that was included in the 24 DMG. Then we also have Folks, Feuds, and Factions, which calls itself the good, the bad, and the in-between, the people who make the city what it is. And so it gets into things like the rivalry between the Rogues Guild and or the Thieves Guild and the Beggars Guild. It gets into things like rival clerics, what's happening down in the sewers, the Cult of the Shriven Sickle, which is a evil cult associated with the god of death, Nerul, which featured prominently in one of my last Greyhawk campaigns. So it's got a lot of good stuff. It's a lot of background information. I intend to pull from it liberally. And the other thing that's interesting, I've run some of these in the past, but it has these like just one-shot, one-sheeter adventures, like brochure type things, like kind of like the late 80s version of the trifold adventures that we have today for Mothership and what have you. So it's just one-sheeters. They're set up by different levels. I think it would be pretty easy to convert these to levels within 5th edition, because 5th edition is pretty backwards compatible in my experience with previous editions of D&D. And it's good just to be able to pull these things. So I've already used a bunch of them, and the guys in my campaign, most of them were actually around when we were in Greyhawk the last time. So I don't know if I'll use them, but I can always file the serial numbers off and mix things up a little bit and still have the basic information. And the guys would probably be none the wiser, except if they're watching this, they might have actually figured it out. It's a good box set. It's very helpful if you're going to be adventuring in the City of Greyhawk, as my campaign is going to be. So next I have the Expedition to the Ruins of Greyhawk. It should really be Expedition to the Ruins of Castle Greyhawk, which is the mega dungeon that is located on the outskirts of the free city of Greyhawk. It's this classic mega dungeon. It may be the original mega dungeon. I'm not really sure on that. It's based on the 2nd edition module called Greyhawk Ruins, which again was based in Castle Greyhawk. This one was released for 3rd edition. I have Greyhawk Ruins. I just can't figure out where the hell I put it in all of these rule books. So I suspect it may be tucked away somewhere, because it was one of the thinner sort of non-hardback versions of the book. But in any case, I don't know if my campaign's going to go to Castle Greyhawk. It wouldn't surprise me if they did. This is an interesting book in that Greyhawk Ruins was laid out based on really kind of a traditional dungeon where you move through the different towers of the Greyhawk castle, and it was kind of room by room. This one, I never actually ran it. It's more thematic encounters, and there's some connective tissue between each of the encounters. And so those encounters are very pretty. Like, this really nice spreads, but I found it a little abstract in the implementation. I don't know. I'm either going to steal from it, or I'm going to find Greyhawk Ruins and use that, or maybe a little bit of both if they decide to go to Castle Greyhawk. And even if they don't, I might be able to use a location or two from here for an adventure somewhere else. The next source book I'm going to talk about is actually much further along in the timeline. So the current Greyhawk timeline is released in the DMG 2024 is 576. This is the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer, which was released a number of years ago to support the Living Greyhawk campaign when that was a thing that WotC did. And it's a really great book. It's set in 591, so it takes place after the Greyhawk Wars, and those really transform the setting. But there's a lot more information in here that wasn't necessarily covered in any of the previous source books that I talked about. And especially, they delved into more detail on some of the particular countries, in part because Living Greyhawk was set up so that each of your real-world regions, like Pennsylvania, was connected to a place in the world of Greyhawk. I think Pennsylvania was Kioland, which is one of the major kingdoms. And so they went in and they gave some additional information for that. I will say, if you can find the Living Greyhawk stuff, there's still some content out there on the web. It's a great place to go and look for content about those particular areas. Greyhawkers love to come up with background information for the setting. They like to elaborate on the little throwaway lines that are included in the various source books. So I would say if you can find content related to Living Greyhawk, it's still great to have. Heck, you could just run your campaign in 591. If you want to do it in 576, there's still going to be content in here that you could mine. That might be the plot lines that are setting up the things that are going to happen 20 years later. So that's a really good book. A really bad book, which you should in no way buy unless, I don't know, you're curious, is Castle Greyhawk. Back in the day, we didn't have the internets, and we did have the mail order hobby shop. And I got one of the catalogs for that, and I saw, World of Greyhawk, Castle Greyhawk, This is awesome because at the time we had heard rumors of Castle Greyhawk, and I don't think Greyhawk Ruins had even been released yet. And so we're like, well, Gary Gygax will eventually publish the Castle Greyhawk, right? This is not that. This is a goofy satire, funny module meant to like riff on D&D. I don't really enjoy it. I was surprised when I got it. There's no reviews online. In I don't know, the 80s when I got this. When did this thing come out? Yeah, this came out in 1988, right? So no one was around to warn me about what this book is. So now in 2024, I'm going to warn you. If you want to read through a piece of D&D history and I don't know, it's got a few jokes in it that you might find funny, sure, pick it up. Whatever. It's a piece of D&D lore. Don't pick it up if you're looking to run Castle Greyhawk, because this is not that. So that's my take on the great library of Greyhawk that I will be using in my Greyhawk 76 campaign. Enjoying Greyhawk 76? Like and subscribe on YouTube or grab the RSS feed the old-fashioned way at lairsecrets.com.